You got to give yourself a little bit of grace to be ready for those waves of different things coming because it's going to be different. And if you get scared and you just decide, I don't want to go there and go back to your old ways, you're just going to stay stuck in the same exact spot for the rest of your career, the rest of your life. And we're here to do way more than just a job.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Swora, host of Evolve, a New Era of Leadership. This is a podcast where we have leaders tune in weekly to hear about different ways of approaching leadership, ways that you might not have necessarily thought involved leadership, but we're here to help stretch those boundaries because our workplaces are hard to exist in without burning out. So welcome. Our guest today is Shelly Starks. Shelly is the CEO of Inline Consulting Services, and she's been working for over 20 years in the coaching field and in business advising. We're going to talk today about communications coaching. I'm going to ask her why she got into that niche area of coaching. And she also is going to talk to us about a theory, and this theory that has really helped her unlock with her clients some really big things. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Shelly, and I hope you take away some learnings for your own leadership journey as well. Hello, Evolve listeners. I'm really excited to be bringing you another episode of Evolve, a New Era of Leadership. And this week, we are going to be talking to Shelly Starks. Shelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Now, I don't remember how we met, but I do know that your passion, your tenacity, and the work that you do with your clients around coaching, I really enjoyed our sort of intro conversation. I thought this is like an energy of somebody that I want to have on the show. And then we started talking about some different ideas. So where we're going to go today, so our audience knows, is around role and identity theory. So tell us a little bit about why leadership is of interest to you and what you do in your job.
Sure. So I actually have done a lot of different things. I've not had a linear career path, and some of the people listening will probably relate to that. And for whatever reason, I just need to say that's okay because you end up finding your way to where you're supposed to be. And when something lights you up, you got to follow that because that's where the passion and that's where the gifts that you are here to give to people, the people you're here to serve. That's where you're going to be able to find those people that you're here to serve. And this is what happened with communications coaching. I had done a lot of different types of coaching, leadership. I had done sales coaching, all kinds. And I liked it. But what really lit me up was when I was able to give people tools on how to communicate. So, how does someone problem solve, make decisions, discuss things with you? And if you can figure out how that other person communicates, and then just even in that moment, figure out how to communicate to them in their behavioral style, their defensive gates go down. There's magic. It's literally like an emotional intelligence level raises in
Mm.
that individual conversation, and you're going to see a different result. And so I thought, you know what? There's just not enough people practicing this. This isn't a very old thing that's been out. It's not like it's something new, but we're not using it, especially in leadership roles. So whenever I finally decided, I think I know what I want to do when I grow up, is that I really want to help people learn to communicate. And it sounds really simple, but we're so stuck in the way that we do things, especially as if we get into a leadership role, we've got a lot of hats that we're wearing.
Yeah.
And so the things that we can go on autopilot, we want to. And then the things that we have to do that are not the fun things, we only do those if we're forced to. So when it's something that's an internal force, like you need to do it yourself and somebody externally is not telling you to do it, sometimes you let that go by the wayside. And communication is one of them because we think
Mhm.
if we'll just communicate in our style, they'll just need to get to know me or get to know how I do things, right?
Right.
Well, you're only wrong about 60% of the time when you do that.
I love what you just said there, Shelly, around autopilot. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we can leave this autopilot because there are certain things in our day that do need to be on autopilot, for lack of a better word, but just not conscious awareness to. And what I'm hearing you say is communication is not one of those places where we should be on autopilot. And yet, how many of us do that?
We all do it. We all do
Yeah.
it. We do it with our spouse, we do it with our kids, and especially women in leadership. I feel like there's a lot of things that they're doing as well that are not just in the role, but during the day, you got to be thinking about those things, right? I got to pick up my son at 4 o'clock from practice. I've got to make sure I get this and this done before I do that. That's always integrated into what we're thinking for the day. So it's easy to go on autopilot on the things that we're not accountable to ourselves on. And communication accountability is personal. If
Mm.
you are expecting somebody else to hold you accountable for that communication piece, that's never gonna work. You have to own that.
It's such a loaded word, accountability. I mean, I do lots of values work with clients, and accountability is like, well, they need to be accountable. No, you need to be accountable. So I really appreciate what you're saying there. So tell us, like, how did role identity theory, or what's it called?
Yeah, identity role theory. Mhm.
So, how did that show up for you, and why did it become something that you thought was really going to help your clients in terms of coming off of autopilot and communicating better?
When I was in a sales training franchise, I had a lot of clients in that franchise and we had a lot of tools available to us. And this wasn't specific to the franchise, this tool, it was been around a while. But I noticed when I did speaking engagements or whenever I did, intros to new client classes, that when I talked about this, it resonated with people, whether they were female or male or in leadership or not in leadership. And it started kind of creating a life of its own where I would say, you know what? This lady would say, my husband has a sales team. Would you do their sales kickoff with this?
Mm.
Because it's something that people can easily digest, super easy to digest, but it resonates so largely in the short amount of time that you explain it that it starts to make you really think outside the box. It gives you some permission to understand why you might be doing the things you're doing or why there's reactive things happening in your life based on some previous experiences that you need to be conscious of so that you are intentionally changing direction on those and changing your mindset.
Right. Now, and let's, before we get into hearing about it, why do you think that this is so important in today's workplace? Like, why do we even really need to give a shit about this?
Well, first of all, communication is the number one thing that we have in every area of our life, regardless of our work. But the problem is that we are getting to a situation now, especially after COVID, where people are wanting to feel something. They want to feel like they're accepted. They want to feel like they are needed at that role. They want to feel like the company, appreciates them instead of just being a number. We're tired of, I mean, we don't have pensions anymore, Carolyn. So, staying at a job for 30 years, companies are not going to be able to just hold that and hold people under their thumb with that anymore. And besides that, I feel like we've launched after COVID into a new, entrepreneurial like phase of culture that people are challenging themselves to say, maybe I could do something on my own, or maybe, if they feel like they can gather that courage. The problem is that the organizations that we work for, they're in the day to day, on the business, like they're not looking in the business. And so when we
Mm.
have our people on the business is great. But, there's something that I coach in my coaching program that is called the three-legged stool. The three-legged stool is you can put anything on those legs, but I always start out it with the leadership that we've got a client-facing leg, we've got a bottom line leg, so the business, and then we've got the internal client-facing leg. And if
Mm.
we forget about the people that make it run to handle the other two pieces of that stool. And if that leg comes off, guess what happens to the stool? It falls over.
Yep.
And so then every leg is affected. So you can't just silo that out. So if we're not being intentional about communication with our people, they're not feeling like you heard and understood them. They're not feeling important and they're going to find another place to go. Your most expensive asset and your most expensive liability is your people.
So I'm hearing a real theme of authenticity here. People can sniff through the BS. And so if we aren't showing up in our communication, being present and authentic, if we're not showing up and being real, people just aren't going to really feel valued or wanted and can pick up and go elsewhere.
I also just had a conversation earlier this morning with somebody. She does a lot of like psychotherapy type stuff. And we were talking about the fact that even over Zoom, we have a sixth sense as humans. And so if you're not being authentically you, or you're extending yourself into another behavioral style because you think you need to be effective in that role, people feel that. And what
Mm,
happens is that we lose trust. I don't care how much trust you've built over time. If they feel every time they talk to you that this isn't the real version of you, the shoe's going to drop later. And I don't know what that feeling, I don't know where it's coming from, but I just feel it. You're not going to get the best version of your people.
yeah,
They're not going to want
absolutely.
to be able to give you the best version of them.
Yeah,
And when
yeah,
someone spends more than 8 hours a day in one role with you, don't you want the best version of them at some point to show up?
absolutely. So why don't we dig into this identity role theory? So maybe top level, what is it?
It is a theory where we are connecting the psychological pieces of the core pieces of who we are to the roles that we identify as. Okay.
Okay.
So identify your identity. Let's just imagine, and if someone has a piece of paper and they're listening and they want to go over this, it's visually, this is an easy way to do it. If you just take a piece of paper and draw a line straight down the middle of that page. On the
Okay.
left-hand side, you write the word identity. On the right-hand side, you write role. On that left-hand side, I want you to write the number 10. And the reason is because when we come into this world, before anything else comes on us and puts pressure on us or has stress on us or we mess up on anything, we come into this world as a 10.
Mm.
We come in as a 10.
And
And
the
so as
10 being, because that's our identity. That's who we are, right? Is
Yeah, a
that's
10
kind of what
being
you
the
mean?
best version of you, like
Okay.
your spirit version that came through, like you were made to be perfect, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what you were made to have that value. And when we have, let's put a 10 up there, right? Because we
Okay.
want to identify that it's a 10. On the right-hand side, I want you to write all the roles that you are in your life. Are you a mother? Are you a wife? Are you an employee? Are you a sister? Go ahead and write out all of those roles
Yeah.
because and especially women they tend to, those things tend to run together more than men, right? Men kind of compartmentalize a little bit more, but they actually don't. There's a lot of theories out there that say men actually have a lot of this touching too. They don't have the capacity necessarily to want to, deal with all of it at the same time. So they deal with it one thing
Mm.
at a time because that's their
Okay.
strategy behind how it works. We, on the other hand, as women, tend to kind of, oh, I got to think about that. Well, wait a second. This one needs to take priority. So it's a different way that we handle it, but it's all the same. We're still touching the same boxes.
Okay, so we've got our list of all the different roles that we play.
Yes,
So like partner, parent, daughter, friend, there could be community places we're part of, sports teams,
absolutely.
and of whatever sport we might like. So there's a lot of different roles, right? We don't have to confine it to like these big Canadian in my case, like
Yeah,
that would be another. Yeah. Okay.
any
So
roles.
so if you're following along, like Shelly said, you've got these two columns. So we've got 10 under the identity column, and under roles, we've got a list of a whole bunch of things.
Yes.
Okay. Where do we
So
go now?
now, if you just pay attention to the fact that 10 comes across the line to all of our roles, and it's usually early on roles, like you're a sister or you're a daughter, right? Those are early on
Yep.
roles because we added roles as we got older. Here's what happens: we have something happen as a child. We got in trouble for something, or we hurt our sibling, or something happened that we literally had this thought of, I'm not good enough, or I was bad about that, because kids, that's
Mm,
how they process that, right? So what happens is that let's say you were a daughter and you hurt your brother and you got in a lot of trouble for that. Well, that role you started feeling less in that role as a sibling. You weren't necessarily
mm.
a 10 anymore. And so now you started to feel like you just weren't good enough. So it comes back across over to your identity as, let's say it's a 6, right?
Okay.
A 6 comes back over to the identity side. Well, the crazy part about identity and role is role could be independent of identity. Identity cannot be independent of your roles. So when that 6 comes over, the 6 is going to go back to all of the roles on the right-hand side of that page. You've now taken yourself from a 10 down to a 6 because you've devalued your value, You feel like you are the person that made the mistake that is in this.
Mm.
If let's say you get a divorce, no matter whose reason or whose fault it is for getting a divorce, both of you have to own parts of that. I've been there. No matter whose fault it is, let's say you started to feel like a three because your marriage failed. In your mind, my marriage
Yep.
failed. That comes back across over to our identity. But because that is part of our psyche and a part of who we are as an actual person, like we were born as a 10 before all this other stuff came in, that
Right.
affects our psyche. And now it's coming across to every single role as a three.
So we start off as a 10, and then different things are going to happen in these different roles. And what I'm hearing you say is it becomes a permeable membrane where it
Yes.
comes back over. And so then I hear this tone of like an inner critic shows up and it brings your overall sort of sense of worth. It brings it down.
On all roles.
And this is happening on an unconscious level, I'm gathering.
Unconscious level. And, you may not even realize, you might think that you're really good at something, right? But if you really pay attention, if you've had another role that's impacting your identity, that's coming back across over to a different role, you might start doubting yourself when before you never doubted yourself and you can't figure out why you're doubting yourself. And it's
Mhm.
because it all comes back to our identity. Our identity is the core piece that we have to protect, and we have to go and nurture our identity because our identity is not what we do, it's who we are. So we blend those. You might have been a mom that didn't work. And when your kids left, you didn't know who you were because you were a mom. We have to start paying attention to the subconscious piece of the identity. And the subconscious piece is we need to be intentional about protecting that identity, finding ways to fill our tank, our love tank for ourselves, right?
Yep.
To
Yep.
make sure we are nurturing our inner being so that we're the best version of ourselves to all of those roles. Everybody can relate to this because we all have done it. You know,
Yeah.
and maybe you lost your mom card. I crack up sometimes. I'm like, one time when Abigail was little, I took her to a movie and I didn't read the previews on it. And it was a really risque movie. And I was like, oh, lost my mom card. Oh my God. She'll
That's
laugh if she
funny.
hears this because it's so true. But, I had to be really careful over the years that I didn't, because there were a lot of those things that happened in my roles that made me feel less than.
So, what I'm hearing you say then is that we need to keep them separate
We
and
need to
not
keep them
let them
separate.
just. So, now we're back to intentional and awareness. And this is where the self compassion comes in to be able to
Yeah.
accept the different roles that we have and recognize, I guess, that different pieces of our identity might show up in those roles. But how do we have that kindness to ourselves to be okay with all of that?
Part of the thing is that you need to spend time with you
Yeah. And who has time for
because
that? I'm sure
I
your
know.
clients tell you that.
It's like, yeah, when am I supposed to do that? Of course, I understand. I run a business and I have a family and I, have hobbies and things that I want to do as well. We always find time to do the things that are important to us. And so if you realize that your version of you is showing up, at it's lower levels, less than a 10, and you're showing up in every single one of those roles less than a 10 because you're allowing that to blend over. What could you possibly be accomplishing if that's your guide? Like that's what drives you. What
Yeah.
could you possibly be accomplishing if you were a full 10? Or even if you were a
Wow.
9 and it's not possible, somebody says to me, well, Shelly, I'm never going to see myself as a 10. That's okay. But you also need to not be, you don't need to be the version of you that made a mistake. And you got to give yourself grace at some point, right? Like at some point, it was a mistake and you have to forgive you.
So I have two questions. The first one is like under that identity column, do you ask your clients to fill out or complete what frames your identity? What are important parts of your identity?
Yeah. So when we do this as an actual client, it's a longer term exercise. It's
Yeah.
1 week because they take it with them and they are actually, going to be filling out what they feel like is their identity. And it's interesting because they don't know the other part of the role side because I don't reveal that side. And they
Okay.
always come in with roles. as their identity because they're identifying as the role. So that's where the power is on the one on or on the coaching, the team coaching is that they're able to see, oh, it just like clicks. It's like, oh, wait a second, I did it. I identified myself as my roles. But they didn't talk about things like, you know, it's important to me that I spend quality time with my children, or it's important that I have my meditation time so that I am, making sure I'm centered for the day and not having all the noise. They don't really
Mm,
say those kind of things that are more feeding the inner being as opposed to, giving you what you need for those roles. So we get confused by
yeah.
them because we identify as the role.
So what kind of question do you pose to them? Like, is it like, what is your identity or how do you describe your identity? What's that opening question?
Yeah, so typically it's if you were to imagine what it means like to describe what your identity is, would it be I usually try to give them a pendulum question like would
Okay.
it be that you are, you're this core person and your belief system and like the things that actually get you up and drive you in the morning, or is it something where I'm a mom and I'm a sister and I'm a this, because I want them to see when we come back and do the exercise, they're like, oh my gosh, I did that. And it's not the wrong answer. It's just that we've literally shaped and formed our culture to blend the two of them. And now that you know it, now you can't unknow it. Now
Right.
you have to separate, you have to be intentional about separating them and knowing the difference.
Right. How does this then tie back to mindful and intentional communication?
So I use a tool called Extended Disk, and I use extended because the extended version of disk because extended actually is you receiving messages that you need to be another style in order to be most effective. So not your own
Mhm.
style, but you're getting messages from somewhere, your family, from work, from somewhere that you need to extend yourself and be in another style to be effective. Well, what we're finding is that when we do these assessments, and I'm seeing this huge arrow across the quadrant that tells me Carolyn is needing to be 80% in a totally different quadrant than her actual core behavioral style. She's probably exhausted. She's probably stressed. She's probably in burnout. And what's happening to every single one of those roles is that those are being impacted by that burnout because now her
Mm,
identity is being linked to the role of her feeling like she needs to be that other style to be effective. She's just extending herself, and that doesn't have anything to do with your actual role in a job and the stresses of that role. That job role could be a wrong role for you for in terms of people
right.
orientation or task orientation. But when I use the extended version and then we've done this exercise, they totally it literally clicks for them. Oh, I'm extending myself into another behavioral style. I'm putting a role on myself that's causing me
Mm,
to reduce my identity value, and it's coming across to that identity, and now it's coming all the way across to every other role in my life because you're probably feeling burnt out at work, but you're probably exhausted at home. So you don't
right.
feel guilty that you're not giving your kids the amount of time that you need because you mentally just don't have it. Or it just ties all together.
Yeah, it's such a great way to say, like, hey, you're not living who you really are, and it's taking a lot more energy. And now you've got some sort of data to help them realize it.
Yeah. And usually they'll sit with that and they'll say, yeah, you know what? My dad was very successful and this was his style, And so you got messages as a kid that this is the style you needed to be in order to be effective. What's happening though, when you show up in that style, it's so inauthentic. And authentic is a real word there, but it's so not you that you
Right.
come across as being maybe aggressive or angry or snippy. You are not living in that space where you should be living and communicating in the way you should be. They feel that. They don't know, they can't put their finger on it, but they know it.
Yep. Yep. That's yeah, our nervous system will communicate that and the co-regulatory environment. You must be like witnessing some real ahas for people. You talked about, the quadrant where I'm having to communicate to that example. How does that value get calculated? Is that like based on a team that you're in or like how do you know? I hesitate to say where you should be because I don't like to should anything, but I guess it assesses your environment, kind of where the rest of your environment is at.
So you want to take the assessment in the mindset of your role at work
Okay.
because sometimes we show up in different ways and roles at home than we would at work. And so you want to take it in that mindset. When I'm in my job, when I'm dealing with the people at work, how do I answer these questions? Not how
Yep.
do I answer them as a core human, but how do
Yep.
I answer them at work? Because you're inadvertently going to answer things that are core you, that are authentically you, because those are going to be questions that resonate and you're going to answer them. Then you're going to
Mm,
answer some things that are so far away from your behavioral style. And we're going to be able to pick up on the fact that is an extended version of you. It's really
mm,
fascinating. So when I show the quadrant for the entire team and there's arrows going all different directions, I have to
yeah.
say to the leaders, we are going to have to sit people down and make sure they understand who they really are. That's part one of this process is
Yep.
what is my style? I need to know what my style is, right? Really, truly my style. And then the second version, what is my team style? And then the third piece of this is how do I communicate to them in a style that makes them comfortable?
Yeah. It's the team style. That's what I was trying to understand. Yeah. Wow. I love that method. And how long does I shouldn't say how long. What happens? What do you find happens with your clients after they've had this data, this realization? What's within their capacity to change?
So we don't just do it in a session and then I'm gone. I usually do 3 sessions, so three back to back, whether that's once a month or every other week. And then I do a quarterly refresher, but I leave them with tools. So there's some accountability to the leadership and the leadership accountability to one another so
Yep.
that they are utilizing because behaviors, this is a behavior. And you have to go into this going, I have to change a behavior. And if I'm not willing to change a
Mm,
behavior, then I'm not going to see a different result. But if I
right.
really want to see a different result, and this is why we talk about them and their behavior and then the behavioral styles of the people in their home when we first do this on the first session, because this makes them have a different psychological connection. Oh my gosh, my husband is totally like that. Like, well, how do you typically find whenever you ask him a question and he doesn't answer it, he goes all the way around and gives you a million different details. What does that feel like to you? What's frustrating to me? Okay, but now you know why he does it. And he needs to do that because he needs to give you all that information because that's how he's processing. So
Yep.
once he gives you all that, you just prepare yourself for that. Ask him because what's going to happen is as soon as he may not make a decision in that whole process of telling you all those details, but when that behavioral style does make a decision, that's the finite decision. You want to catch him as he's coming around with all these details because once he makes a decision, if you don't like it, he's stuck. So now I've made it personal. Like now they're like, "Oh my
Yep.
gosh, this is my personal life." I want to do this because I love my family. They may not want to do the behaviors at work because they're just at work to make a paycheck or whatever. But they will want to make the behavior change at home and it bleeds over to the business.
And I'm gonna guess some clients wanna do vice versa, right? Like, they want it to be better at work, and it bleeds over into their personal life.
Happens a lot, yeah.
So, authenticity and anchoring to our identity is kind of like a way of defining authenticity right now,
Yeah, I think
and
so.
it burns less energy, I'm hearing you
Absolutely.
say, which means it's a really fantastic resilience tool to anchor yourself in your identity, not your role.
Absolutely. The other thing is that it takes time for you. That's when I said earlier you should spend time with you.
Yeah.
Because I realized as I got older, and this is only since I've gotten into my 40s, it's interesting how these different phases of life give you different buckets of wisdom. I was very much a people pleaser and was always doing what everybody expected me to do or what I thought they wanted me to do. So I
Mhm.
extended myself for a good chunk of my career. People loved me. Like they thought I was great. They thought I was just not. I was living in a version of me that wasn't really me,
Right.
right? And so because of that, I don't feel like they got the best version of me, even though they thought they did.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the best version of me for me. After I went through this health crisis in 2022, had a radical hysterectomy, it took me down a path that I was not expecting. It caused me to shake my core to say, just because I do something and I'm good at it doesn't mean I should do it. And just because somebody expects it of me doesn't mean that I'm required. So I was able to take this experience and take this 20 years of behavioral analysis coaching that I have been certified in this for 20 years and blend this together and be able to say, oh my gosh, this was a missing. I've been coaching this for a while, but this is a missing piece for me. And so I needed to go spend some time with me because I needed to learn who that really was. I was
Yeah.
living this life because of all my roles. It really wasn't me. And I don't think anybody would say, "Oh my gosh, this version of you, Shelly, is so different from the original." It's just the core piece of me, right?
I'm going to guess maybe it's not like visually different, but I'm going to guess the energy, the way that you interact with people comes from maybe a softer place, maybe you're more generous, more compassionate, right? Cuz
Very
ultimately I
much.
find the way we treat others is ultimately how we're actually treating ourselves.
Well, and I grew up with a mother that had she's a very direct, and I
Yep.
am very direct, but not as direct as her. And so
Mm,
when I was as a young professional, I thought I had to be super direct. Well, it
yep.
didn't come across as being direct. It came across as being bitchy. And so I didn't realize that until a little bit later when people are like, Shelly, you seem so worked up about this, but that doesn't really feel like something you would be worked up about. Why are you being so aggressive about that? And I didn't feel like I was being aggressive. I just thought I was showing up in a role that I was supposed to show up in that style. When I learned not to do that, it was less exhausting for sure.
Yeah, you can really see that you've got some new legs, another stool to talk about if you haven't done it already, right? There's resilience, energy, and authenticity are like
Yeah.
three other legs of a stool here.
You can use
Shelly,
the
what
three-legged stool in anything.
yeah, it is. It's a great tool. What advice or what insight, anything else you would like to share for the leaders listening right now before we close off?
I think that when you go start down this journey of figuring out who you really are, there's going to be some things that you didn't realize that you were able to do. So instead of thinking this is just going to be hard and I'm not going to like what I see because I've been living an inauthentic space or I've had to because of the roles that I'm in, try to give yourself some grace.
Mm,
When you are going through a period, your journey, it's a journey, meaning it's not a destination, it's all along the way. And when you discover certain things, you're going to start realizing certain things don't serve you anymore.
yeah,
Certain people in your life aren't the people that are meant to be there. The energy changes and shifts in you, and therefore the energy that you attract changes and shifts. And so you got to give yourself a little bit of grace to be ready for those waves of different things coming because it's going to be different. If you get scared and you just decide, I don't want to go there and go back to your old ways, you're just going to stay stuck in the same exact spot for the rest of
yeah,
your career or the rest of your life. And we're here to do way more than just a job.
yeah. I love it. Well, Shelly, where could our listeners find out more about you and your work?
On all the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, but shellystarks.com is the best way to reach me.
All right, perfect. Perfect. Now, before we close out, I ask all of our guests three questions that revolve around Evolve, my book right there, that book. And so, are you game for those three questions?
I am. I'm
All
ready.
right. Well, the first one has to do with self awareness, which we've obviously talked about in our conversation today. Is there a short insight that you can share with us? I always find when we can hear each other's stories of elevating our self awareness, it leads to other insights for us. So, what could you share with us?
Really, I thought about this for a while. And what I came up was that I don't serve anyone when I try to please everyone.
Mm,
And that I need to be considered in that equation when I'm trying to please people because
yeah,
that's something I grew up with. But it doesn't serve me and it doesn't serve anyone else when all I do is please them.
yeah. Sounds like you're practicing what you preach.
I try very hard to do that because when I come into coaching, I use my personal examples a lot because I feel like they
Yeah,
feel it and they know that it's not just a technique or a tool.
right.
It's really something that can change the way that they come across to the rest of the world.
Yeah. So, second question is around rituals, routines, things that you do to help regulate yourself.
We live in Florida and we live on the water, and I love the ocean.
Mm.
We try to spend a couple of times a week just watching a sunset, even if I go down to the
Ah,
beach. I go and walk, on the sand with no shoes. Or the other thing I love to do is I do a lot of gardening with no shoes on because I like to ground. And
mm,
this just really helps me kind of reset my, electric circuit within my
yeah.
body. But if you ever get a chance to just sit in water is one of those things that helps to mute all of the other stuff around you energy wise.
Mm.
And it just gives you a nice neutral feeling. So if you can, float in a pool, be in the ocean, be in a lake, it's a good way to kind of mute all of the noise.
You still kind of have me back walking along the beach, and then I'm visualizing a sunset. And I mean, you can see I love sunsets, right? That picture
I
right
see
there. I've
that.
got
Yeah.
got a tattoo. So yeah. When you're walking on the beach, think of me this evening or this weekend when you're there.
We'll have to exchange phone numbers.
Uh,
I'll send you a sunset picture.
Oh, beautiful. I love sunset pictures. Now, finally, last question. And this has to do with co regulation. We are so interconnected to each other. And I find music is a way that we can feel that interconnection. So, my question is, what song or genre of music helps you feel connected to something bigger than yourself?
So I actually write and sing music, and so
Oh,
music has always been
wow.
a big part of my life. But anything with a hint of blues in it.
Mm,
So I feel that soul of that person just really kind of turning inside out. And in most cases, the blues, even if it's not singing about something that was like terrible to them, there's something that's connecting to their soul that they're like bearing their soul in that. And it's more, they're digging to a different level to pull out that sound. And
mm,
so I like to always put some kind of bluesy sound to anything that I sing or I write because people like tell me later, Shelly, I really felt that. Like, wow,
right.
that really like I got connected to that. And you're absolutely right about music. I have a brother with Down syndrome that's 18 and he's nonverbal. But anytime that there is music around, he lights up and he wants everybody else to be dancing and he wants to be hugging people. And I mean, it changes his entire demeanor, you know?
Yeah.
So I love this question because people should spend more time saturating in music.
Yeah, I had an aunt and she had Downs. She was verbal. She lived till she was 52.
Wow.
And yeah, it was amazing. This was back because she was born in the 50s. And they said that her life expectancy would be, lucky if it got over 20. And so
Some
she was such a
goosebumps,
big
Carolyn.
part of our family. And music, I just remember she was just so happy. And she had this rocking chair. And at the time, we had cassette tapes and 8 tracks. So she had her little machine right there. And she would just listen to the music. And so every time I remember going into my grandparents' house where she lived, there would be music playing and this big smile, and she'd sing along. It's such a beautiful way to communicate with each other and really to show us how powerful our presence can be with each other. And it doesn't just have to be through words.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and even when there's no words, you still
Yeah.
can feel things, when somebody's put
Yep.
their signature on a riff or, a piano run or something, you literally are like, "Oh, I feel that."
Yeah. Wow. Is there like an artist or a song, or like, are you on any of these platforms? Do people go check you out somewhere?
I am. My first album is on Spotify, but my when I was signed to Universal out of London, my EP did not, it got shelved. So
Oh,
the last thing that I had, which was something I wrote called Battle Scars, is not available out there, but if anybody wants to reach out to me and wants to hear it, I'll send it to you on email.
oh, beautiful. Well, Shelly, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing everything today with us.
Thank you for having me. I love these kind of conversations, and I just think what you're doing is incredible for these leaders. So thank you for the platform.
Oh, thanks, Shelly. That was the first time that I have had a conversation with anyone about role and identity theory. And I really appreciate how Shelley has taken a theory, a concept, her own life experience, her professional training as a coach and as a certified DISC practitioner, And she's blended these 3 things into a really useful exercise with her clients. Maybe you follow along on the instructions that she shared with us. And if you didn't, maybe it's something you can go back to and try out. I know I took a few notes and made my own column of role and identity, and that's really sitting with me. Really so grateful that you have tuned into this episode, and I hope you can come back for more. We release episodes weekly, and there is plenty more to come. Also, you can find me at carolynswora.com. So hop on over there, check it out. And while you're there, maybe you'll find a few things that you like. Take care.